Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I just want to start by thanking Shamele and Jayne and Lawnside helped a little bit with the research. And so Shamele's going to get us started. We'll each talk briefly and then we hope to leave lots of time for questions and discussion.
Hi, everyone. Before I get started, I should have did this during the announcements, but I want to let you know that the Lawnside Historical Society and the Dr. James Still Center, we're in the middle of our Underground Railroad experience. Yesterday at the Peter Mott House, we had a freedom board game. It's really intense. I wish I could tell you about it, but we have to get along with the presentation. So if you wanted to play the freedom board game, we have that. We also have a virtual reality game that a college created for us. So people, you can run away escape from Snow Hill, Maryland to Snow Hill, New Jersey. And then also both locations have replicas of Henry Box Brown's box that he shipped himself to freedom. And so you can experience that as well. So today, after this until 4 o'clock, they will be at the Dr. James Still Center. And they will have a man who's going to do a staged readings of the narrative of Henry Box Brown. So I know you'll probably be tired after this, so on March 29th, which is the actual day that he shipped himself to freedom, we're going to have Henry Box Brown Day at the Peter Mott House in Lawnside from 12 to 3, and he will do the staged reading there, and we'll have a small program. So Underground Railroad experience. So again, thank you so much for being here. I am with these wonderful women. We have had a wonderful time. I'm going to talk to you about the project. Jayne is going to talk to you about the Quaker timeline. And then Linda is going to wrap it up with what we've learned. So about the project. So I grew up in Lawnside. It's one of the towns I grew up in, also from East Berlin. And Lawnside has the designation of being the first and only independently governed African-American municipality, sounds like a lot, right, in the state of New Jersey. And we're very, very proud of that. And as the first African-American town, you wonder how did this town become what it is? And so there are two origin stories that I've heard all my life. And all of them lead back to Haddonfield, right? And so one of the stories was in 1840, Ralph Smith, a Haddonfield Quaker, decided he wanted to buy land and set up the formerly enslaved in Lawnside. So first of all, he wasn't a Haddonfield Quaker. He was from Northern Liberty, still trying to figure out why they said that. The other thing is he wasn't alone. There was a person named Jacob C. White Sr., and he was an abolitionist in Philly. Him, Ralph Smith, and other abolitionists in Philly created a company called the Agricultural Mechanical Association of Pennsylvania and New Jersey, where they had stock, where they bought materials to buy land and build homes for people here. So we also have the origin story that in 1790s, when the Quakers manumitted, they bought land in Lawnside and they set their formerly enslaved up there. So I've always wanted to research that story. And I knew this wonderful woman, and I knew that if I approached her, that she would say, let's do it. And so I talked to her, and of course she said, let's do it. And she said, create a formal letter to request support. Oh, what do I do to get you to advance slide? Okay, so that was the next one. So this was the letter for support that I wrote to the Haddonfield monthly meeting. And being the gracious meeting that you are, you said, let's do it. And so we formalized a modest plan because all of our lives are just, busting, and I'm practicing saying no and trying to focus on things. This one was just too good to do. So together, next slide, we created a project goal.
and that is to create a database of enslaved Africans who were manumitted by the Quakers in the Haddonfield Meeting. In addition to us getting together to do this, I learned about Avis's project, the 339 Manumissions and Beyond project. Their project is to trace, first to create a database of all those who were manumitted by the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, all the meeting houses that were a part of that. And then, this is the brilliance of it, to trace the enslaved to the present day. This is her inspiration. And we met up. It's just like, it's time. So she did her presentation. I came to it. I got the database. Of course, I have to see that database because I'm thinking Haddonfield's going to be in there. No South Jersey in there at all. So we're like, we're not having that. We're used to that with the Philly news. They don't talk about South Jersey. It's like, we barely exist. We're not having this. And so they graciously said, whatever you get, we will add it to the 339 project. So that is what we are working on. So next slide. I am grateful to the Haddonfield Yearly Meeting. I'm grateful to the Lawnside Historical Society who said, you know, Shamele, just go do what you want. And the 339 project who already has an infrastructure set up that we can be a part of. Next slide. So the plan, of course, was to continue the research, the minutes that Linda and the committee here had already been working on, to study the historical context, which right now, it's like a portal. Think about it. We are researching 1770s, 1790s. What is the country about to do? Semi-sesquicentennial. This is a serious portal back in time. When, like last year, I felt like I was getting swept up by the American Revolution. You know how Christmas is, where you just can't ignore it? Well, that's what's happening in New Jersey. So it's a perfect time to study this. Then, of course, we needed to locate all these manumissions. We traveled to different places. I'll talk about those. And then the goal is to research the enslaver and the enslaved. And we are creating our own database that will be added to the 339 database. So we got to go into some wonderful places like Haverford and Swarthmore, and right down the street, which was, you know, we got some really good stuff there at the Haddonfield Historical Society and the County Historical Societies, Gloucester as well as Camden. When we were at Haverford, we had, do you guys know the genealogists dance when they find really good stuff? So, can you go one slide forward, one more slide forward? When we got to Haverford and we found this book, Evesham Manumission books, like just all just right there, like no work, just right there. We're like, this is gonna be a layup, you know, we're gonna go and have lunch early. Well, this is the only meeting house that we found like a book, right? But we did find some loose manumissions, but this one was really, really, next slide. This one was great. So record book of the Negroes within the compass. I love how they talk back in the day of Evesham monthly meeting. And so next slide. And so this is an example of a manumission. And a manumission contains the name of the enslaved, the enslaver, hopefully their location, hopefully they go deeper than just county. The age, usually you can determine the age of the enslaved person, the date that they are manumitted or will be manumitted, and the date that it was created, as well as witnesses. They needed to have 4 people sign it, overseers of the poor plus witnesses. Next slide. So the last time I was honored to speak here, after the meeting, I think we were on Zoom. After the meeting, I got a call, an email from a Quaker, and he says, Shamele, I need your help. I was reading this book about Philadelphia Quakers and slavery, and it said my ancestors held slaves. Sorry, tech people. My ancestors held slaves, and I don't see any. I have their will. What's this man talking about? And so I said, send me your will. And so he sent me this, which is an abstract of a will. So they pull out the bits that they think are important. And guess who they don't pull out? The enslaved people. Next slide. So I said, Jonathan, we have to get the actual will. And look, the will is 3 pages. 3 pages, and they pulled it down to this little thing. I'm not hating on abstracts, they're important. But once I got this full will in there, next slide, it listed, unto my wife, my Negro man Aceton, during her life, but, and then next slide, it has my Negro woman Beck and my Negro man Jack. So here is the evidence in here. So he's like, okay, well, what happened to him? I'm like, dude, this is like 17 something. I don't know. I need a moment. And so did some research, because he was really concerned that did his people manumit or did they get kicked out of meeting? What happened? And so right down the street, next slide, we found these transcriptions, and this one is the Emancipation of Samuel Clemens Negro Jack. So I was able to find Jack was manumitted. I haven't been able to find the other 2, nor have I been able to find the actual manuscript. This is just a transcript of it. Next slide. Also, and this was a find of Linda and Jayne, and I think Lois told them about this. And this is a record of manumissions of Negroes set at liberty within the compass of Haddonfield Monthly Meeting. And so it's telling us about an 88-page book that has all this stuff in it. 6.5 inches by 8 1/4. It, like, we have all this stuff. Just give me the book. Like, we don't have the book yet, but we do have the names, right? So next slide. They listed them. Samuel Clement, and it's listing the people that he's holding in bondage. And there we have Jack is on the first, my name Jack. Okay, he's about 46 years old. It has the date, okay, it has the witnesses, and it lists all the other people as well. Next page. These are some more that are listed. Next page. And so far, my number, Linda said my number is 99, so we have to have a little conference about this. I can't run over. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 manumissions, 100 names that we have been able to find over the past year. And this isn't Haddonfield, it's all of these different locations: Defford, Evesham, Gloucester Township, Newton, Waterford, Woolwich. So Avis, get ready for these names to come to the 339 project. And now we're going to have the Quaker timeline. Thank you. You don't have to do anything up there.
All right. In the late 1900s, or late 1600s, Quakers began to settle in a part of New Jersey called West Jersey, which is this area. It's like a diagonal line from the Delaware Water Gap all the way down to Egg Harbor, is West Jersey. Some of these settlers brought enslaved Africans to work on their farms and plantations. The New Jersey concessions and agreements actually encouraged this practice by allotting extra acreage to settlers for every servant they brought with them. For example, every settler would get 70 acres. For every servant they brought with them, they'd get another 70 acres. and for every lesser servant, they'd get 50 acres. By 1682, Quakers had established a colony at the mouth of Newton Creek, which is in present-day Camden, and in 1784 built a meeting house at Newton. Meanwhile, Quakers in Pennsylvania were beginning to protest slavery. In 1690, Philadelphia Yearly Meeting minute, it's the advice of this meeting that friends be careful not to encourage the bringing in of any more Negroes, and that such that have Negroes be careful of them. Bring them to meetings and restrain them from loose and lewd living and from rambling abroad on first days or other times. And extended this advice to meetings in West Jersey. In the early 1700s, slaveholding was common in West Jersey, and many prominent Quakers owned slaves. The Cooper family, Quakers in Newton, owned and ran ferries that transported slaves and held slave auctions. This was like an ad from a paper in 1762 about a slave auction. Haddonfield Meeting House was built in 1721. In 1738, Haddonfield and Salem Quarter directed the meetings in the quarter to report on the status of their members regarding buying and selling slaves. By 1754, PYM issued an epistle of caution and advice concerning the buying and keeping of slaves. And that's part of the text of it. And in 1758, directed meetings to disown members who engaged in this practice. At this time, John Woolman, a Mount Holly tailor, published some considerations on the keeping of Negroes and began traveling to meetings in Pennsylvania and New Jersey to persuade Quakers to free their slaves. From the early 1760s through the mid-1770s, Quakers continued to meet with members in Haddonfield Quarter who owned slaves. This proceeded very slowly due to Quaker process, with cases being continued month after month. But slowly, individuals began to manumit their slaves. In 1776, PYM outlawed slavery, and Haddonfield Quarterly Meeting stepped up its efforts. A committee was formed to meet with members regarding manumissions, and Thomas Redmond was appointed to record the manumissions in a book and in printed form. Meeting members finally began manumitting their slaves. By mid-1777, more than 18 manumissions had been recorded. By mid-1778, the total grew to 50. Quarterly meetings directed monthly meetings to deal with their members who refused to manumit their slaves. Haddonfield monthly meeting disowned 4 members, and in 1788 reported there were no Negroes held in bondage among us. This was due to a combination of manumissions and disownment of slaveholding members. In reality, even though they were manumitted, some of the slaves were not to be freed until they reached a certain age. So there were still slaves in Haddonfield Meeting for the next 10 to 15 years. Efforts to free slaves continued in West Jersey with the establishment of the New Jersey Society for the Abolition of Slavery in 1793, which had many Quakers from Haddonfield Quarter as members.
So, what did we find? I'm going to give a little background first. Let's see. This shows you a page from the minutes held by Haddonfield Meeting. The men's meeting book is about this big, 300 some pages, and that covered, I think, almost a century of minutes. In other words, their minutes were a lot shorter than ours. They were very brief and very concise. What I found in reading both the men's minutes and the women's minutes is that usually the first thing they talked about was marriage. People requesting to be married under the care of the meeting, and then also monitoring these couples to make sure there wasn't any hanky-panky. The second thing that they talked about then was people who had been doing something that was not appropriate for a Quaker, and therefore would impact the reputation of Quakers. And this category included quite a lot of things, but the easiest thing to say is drunkenness and many other activities that the meeting would send someone out to labor with the person or the family, and sometimes this laboring went on month after month, and until such time as the person finally agreed to stop doing whatever they were doing and to apologize to the meeting, or in some cases they would leave the meeting. And then the third thing was, it was very important to get a certificate. If you wanted to go visit another meeting, you needed to carry with you a certificate. So in the minutes, there was always a list of people who were planning to travel and visit folks, and they needed certificates. And then also they would indicate who was visiting and what certificates they'd gotten from other meetings. But overall, the meetings were very brief and rarely talked about what was going on in the real world at that time. It's really disappointing. Also, the minutes are written in cursive style. You know, it was all handwritten, and sometimes this isn't the, this is actually easy to read. A lot of times it's the huge S's and F's, and you can't figure out what's what. So usually in many of these minutes we would get 90-95%, but there were always words that were very hard to read. So actually, if you go back to the other one. So I wanted to share with you a typical minute once the meeting was talking about slavery. This is from 1774. Okay, all right, well, I'll just read it. And so the point on the agenda, the resumption of visiting families still slave keeping is now being resumed by our friend James Cooper, expressing a concern to visit some friends' families. And our friend Ebenezer Miller, being present, informed the meeting he also had a concern to visit friends in the vicinity of Woodbury and Upper Greenwich. And he had liberty, a certificate from Salem Meeting for that purpose. Friends expressing united therewith, these people are at liberty to proceed therein. Solomon Lippincott and Benjamin Hooton are desired to accompany them when they can in the service, and that they will call on the elders of Woodbury or else David Cooper within the compass of Woodbury as they find freedom. Not plain talking in our context. And so when we're talking about within the compass of Haddonfield Meeting, we're still not totally sure about that, but apparently if you go back to the map, basically it meant what was Gloucester County at that time, Olde Gloucester County. And so that included Newton, or today Camden, Haddonfield, and then all the way down into Gloucester County. And so that included Deptford, Woodbury, Greenwich, Woolwich, and so on. And so each of these, when there was monthly meeting here at Haddonfield, representatives of those meetings would come here, and they would be talking about what's going on in the whole region. And then Shamele talked to you basically about what is in a manumission document. Now, if you can go back to the one that was easy to read. Okay, so what this actually says, what is typical in a manumission document. Okay, To the overseers of the poor of the township of Waterford in the county of Gloucester, and to John Griffith and Samuel Renard, 2 of the justices of the peace of said county. These may be set forth that we, the subscribers, do hereby set free from bondage one Negro woman named Rintha, aged 23 this month, and do for ourselves, prosecutors and administrators, release the said Negro Rintha. All our right and claims whatsoever with her person or to any estate she may acquire, hereby declaring the said Negro woman Rintha absolutely free without any interruption from us or any person claiming under us. In witness thereof, we have hereunto set our hands and seals this 25th day of the 3rd month, 1794. And we desire your certificate to confirm that said freedom promised in March of 86 are signed, and then by the 2 men, David and Richard Davis. And then it's also signed and sealed by the 2 officials. And so this will give you an idea of what was involved in each of these different documents. In this case, as was noted earlier, Rintha was about 15 at the time that she was promised freedom, but she needed to work 8 more years until she reached the age of 23, until she could be freed. And so now I want to talk about statistics. They're cold, they're hard, and have no real reflection of what it means for all of these people to have been enslaved and to be freed. But I want to share some of this information to give you a better picture of what was happening. So across Olde Gloucester County, including Haddonfield and Camden, 99 people were manumitted by early Quakers. Only 15 of these people were listed as having a first and last name. Everyone else was listed by the first name. By my count, 59 were male, 42 female. And there was one person where we didn't get any information at all. It was just somebody's freed. And so I want to actually say the names of these people who were free. So the men included Ati, I think there were 3 Atis in this list: Cato, Kufi, Jeremiah, Pero, Tom, and Anthony. Some of the women's names were Dinah, Hannah, Rintha, and Sarah. And so as we look at this document, as I said, sometimes it was a child to be released at a future date. We looked for a lot of additional information, such as going to the wills and trying to learn more about these people. What is really important to understand is that throughout this period, there were queries, particularly for the women and for the elders. And the question of slavery came up, particularly for the women. Are you taking care in your work with the Negro? What we don't know actually is who those people are who were released. We don't know really who the enslavers were as people. We don't know how they treated these people. We can imagine what it might have been like. Oftentimes it was a single family farm or a small family business, and there was just one person enslaved working with them. But we don't know anything other than they kept being queries about taking good care of people, and so that suggests to me that there were people who were not acting properly. We also know that within the state of New Jersey, there were mulatto children being born, and again, that suggests the possibility of violence and rape, but we have no specifics on that. So I wanted to share a little bit more about the Quakers, the enslavers. Generally, they were men. There was at least one woman listed as an executor for her husband, and there were several other women actually named as enslavers. By my count, there were 44 Quakers in the county. 28 of these were recorded as manumitting one person, but Hannah Ladd released 9 people from slavery, Samuel Clement 8 people, Jacob Jennings 7 people, Isaac Ellis 5 people, Joseph Hugg 5 people, and then there were 5 people who released 4 each, including John Gill, whose name is well known in this town. The time frame, as noted, most of the people were released from slavery between 1776 and 79. Of course, that's during the commotion or the Revolutionary War. And based on the documents we found so far, the Manumissions actually began in 1771 and ended in 1807. So the final document here is a census of slaves in Newton Township, Olde Gloucester County. So that would include present-day Camden and Haddonfield. And so this, and I handed out a piece of paper with this, so you can look at it. This basically gives you an idea of how long it took for some people to finally manumit their enslaved people, with 2 people still holding on as late as 1795. But it just gives you an idea of what was going on at that time. Some people releasing people from slavery in 79 and 82, but several people just holding on. So that's all I have for now. And I'm sorry, I want to say one other thing. We found a lot of other materials. We wanted to keep this short and tight, but I think one of the most important documents we found in terms of looking at this from a perspective of Quakers is there was a document prepared that included all of the minutes by yearly meetings, predominantly PYM, but also the others in the colonies at that time. And so we have actual copies of the minutes that reflect the gradual decisions of deciding that it was important to begin manumitting and then finally declaring that slavery was over within the yearly meeting. So, thank you. So, questions, comments?
This was so great. But I'm really curious about all the rest of the information and what the next steps are. So that's my question. What are the next steps? And what's going to happen to all the other information that you have?
Our goal is to eventually have clean numbers for our chart that has all of the manumissions based on the materials we found here at Haddonfield Historical Society. And that information would go up on our website, on Haddonfield's website, Lawncide's website. And we promised the information to Haverford. They can't actually post it because they didn't do the research, but they will include a link to our research. We haven't yet figured out all the materials, but certainly that document with all of the minutes, Quaker minutes, we will make sure that it gets posted somewhere, somehow.
So I'm sorry, I just wanted to finish up with Linda's, to the question Linda just asked, what are we going to do with it? In addition to turning it over to the 339 project, for me as a family history researcher, it's important to support the databases that are already out there for slavery. There's like enslaved.org, which pulled together a lot of academic databases. So we want people to be able to access their families the easiest way possible. So we want to put it up there. And Rutgers is very excited about this because they have a New Jersey slavery database, which is primarily, guess what? Central and North Jersey, if there's such thing as Central Jersey. We are going to fill in the South Jersey stuff so that we have representation there too. So we're going to contribute to the things that are already there.
Hi, this is Adrienne. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm with the Preserving Black Haddonfield History Project and also WHYY. I may have missed something. You talked about
You can't see her?
about 44 enslavers. Were these all in Haddonfield?
They were members, they were within the compass, so they were members of the meeting, but they weren't necessarily living in Haddonfield.
Do we know how many were in Haddonfield?
Very few, she's saying. But would you say it's very few?
We found very few.
So right now, when it comes to the actual manumissions, we don't have all the manumissions for Haddonfield, but within the list that we got from the Haddonfield Historical Society that shows those manumissions, very few, Linda is saying, lived in Haddonfield.
Okay, so maybe we can have a conversation later. I'm very interested in knowing how many enslavers were actually in Haddonfield.
Okay.
And then if we don't have the evidence of the enslavers, how do you know how many were actually free?
That's a part of the continued research. So we have to go through the court records. Hopefully while we're going through those court records, that Manumission Book A will show up at some point. So yeah, the research is continuing. We feel that we're still kind of in the beginning stages.
Okay, thank you. Congratulations. And thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go way out on a limb here. We know that John Woolman was visiting meetings in the immediate area quite early on.
Separate them.
And we also know that Thomas Redmond, who was clerk of the meeting, and Joshua Evans were very ardent abolitionists. And so we've not found the numbers in the list that was mandated for each quarter to record manumissions. But we've been through the men's book and have not come up with much other information. And so it may be that slavery was ended in this meeting. No, I take it back. We did an earlier document called, which was a chronology for Haddonfield Meeting, and it did take us a while. I'll have to pull that information up for you.
Hi, my name is Shamele, and I was very involved in researching the history of Haddonfield Friends School for the New Jersey Historic Trust grant that we got. And in doing that, I found some information related to this. And so I have some questions. One is, we learned, of course, that by 1786, they were instructing African American students in the building, in the 1786, which is part of our 1853 schoolhouse, and we have actual names of those children. Did you find the names of children in any of the manumission? And the second question is, I ran into information that some of the enslavers waited until the men were 21 because they were responsible economically for them until they were 21, and the women were 18. Did you find any of that information or anything else related to the school? Because we don't profess that.
We did not find as much information as you did, and I know a researcher who would be very interested in knowing some of the details you found about schooling. What we did see was that I think it was the end of the 1700s or the beginning of 1800, that PYM mandated that Quaker meetings have schools. And so at that point, the mixed school that had existed here, I think, was then segregated. If you came up with information, I'd love to know that. So that's the one piece. Clearly, there were children who were given, a document was signed saying that they would be released at a later date. And so Rintha, who I mentioned, was 15. I don't know if any were young children, but generally they waited until 15, 16, 17 for women, and they did wait for men as well.
So first of all, thank you very much for this. I've only recently moved to the New Jersey area, and I'm completely new to New Jersey, so this history was really wonderful to understand as I'm settling into this community. I was very curious because several years ago I attended the Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina meeting that was also doing a Manumission project, but from what I understand, the Manumissions in that area were less successful and more contentious with that meeting in that era. And so I was curious from your having looked at the actual meeting minutes, whether there's any notes of discussion of how the meeting came to this consensus that Manumission needed to happen and move forward with that in that context.
You wanna
Sorry. There was a lot of, typically what would happen was they would, decide to deal with someone who was owning slaves. And they had committees that would go and meet with them. And then they would come back the next month and say, we're holding it over to the next month and the next month and the next month. And there was often comment on there was one particular one, there was a lot of comment where the committee itself had really mixed feelings about how they felt about holding slaves and weren't really sure that it was a bad thing, So there was a lot of discussion. It wasn't like, like angry, but there was a lot of discussion, which is why it took so long.
I want to also go back to PYM. A lot of the action that took place in the meeting here was because PYM mandated something had to be done. It provided queries, it requested the queries, and so on. But if we go back to 1758, there had already been something raised about slavery in 56. And so 2 years later, there was to be a meeting that would really address the question of slavery. And in advance of that, knowing slavery was to be discussed and it was time to start ending slavery, some wealthy businessmen went out and bought new slaves, just as sort of a but John Woolman, our neighbor from Mount Holly, was the man of the day. As these people were saying, we have to wait, we're not ready. He stood up with deep concern and spoke very wisely, saying, these people are oppressed. We need to do something. Friends Journal did a piece in 1958 that quotes his full presentation, but it was a very powerful statement, and after that comment was made, PYM said it's time for us to begin ending slavery.
This is a writer's question. Do you know the difference, because I don't, between disunited and disowned? I'm seeing both represented here. I've heard both terms before in my own research, but I still don't know if there's a difference between the two. No? Okay, keep looking.
Anybody in the audience who knows that?
Well, when up done and kicked me out, they called it kicking me out. It's hard listening to this. And if people don't know, this is my leading, is to find the enslaved history of the people that were held in bondage by us, the Religious Society of Friends. Isn't that an oxymoron? That they couldn't see the God and people look like me? So that's one of the things is we can't tear up everybody, but we got to get to the dirty truth. Slavery was a bad thing, holding somebody in bondage. And the okie dokie of the manumission is sometimes it wasn't honored. The man or the lady dropped dead and the surviving spouse said, no, I'm not letting them go. So that was the okie dokie. And the other thing is the immense wealth, the white privilege that became this. We're not talking about that, but that needs to be talked about. The Quaker meetings today are not welcoming. We keep working on that, but they're not. I'm so glad that y'all meeting here, let us talk about this. We ain't mad, everybody's shaking their head. And little by little, we get people to understand that raping, killing, maiming black people wasn't right. And it's something for us to do now, is to help join these families that were torn asunder. I'm here, they're here, and you're here. That's what God told y'all to be at today.
So just a little background. While the PYN outlawed slavery in 1776, back in 1738 when the PYN had their annual meeting in Burlington, there was a man named Benjamin Wright, who was a little person, who, of course, as you guys all know, stood up in that meeting unbeknownst to everybody else and actually brought up slavery almost 40 years before PYN outlawed it, and had a hidden container of wine, maybe it was?
Animal blood.
Okay. And then stabbed it and said something to the fact that the slave's blood was on all of these people's, hands. So it didn't happen instantly. It was at least 40 years that we know of. But also the fact that the people who came into Burlington on Kent, some of them were members of families that owned slavery plantations in Barbados, is it? So this was going on for a while. So there was that white upper class gentleman group that came in that were the yeomen? I don't know how to say the word, but they owned the property. Yes. And so it was intrinsic, and it was just amazing that through listening to God in their hearts, the light within, that in the end, the Quakers realized this was wrong, and they were able to overcome it, even though they were some of the people who brought in slaves initially. So.
If I can just say one thing, it was always a question to me why it would take 100 years to figure this out. And we know that many different kinds of arguments were raised. We mostly hear about people saying the golden rule and the Quaker belief there's that in God in everyone. But there are lots of other reasons that people lifted up. One was there was a person who did a long financial analysis proving that slavery wasn't really the best financial approach. And so on. So there were a lot of different reasons. It took a long time till finally people agreed. Today, I liken it to what we're seeing in terms of climate change. When I was in college, we had Earth Day, and that was in the early 70s. And so right now, we've just watched EPA get the destruction of EPA and the kinds of environmental protection and a complete disregard to all of the efforts that have been made to try to reduce our carbon footprint. And so we see today what it means to try to change a very important part of society. I hope it won't take us 100 years, but I think that helped me understand why it took so long.
I have a question about Elizabeth Hatton, who I know obviously was earlier than this. But my understanding is we know for sure she had one enslaved person. Do we know what happened to that person or the relatives? Because it's not mentioned here.
So Elizabeth Haddon, they said she had multiple enslaved people, but the one that we know about is Primus Marsh. And the only reason that we know his name has nothing to do with her. She absolutely never mentioned his name in her will anywhere. She just said, my old Negro. And when she died, she told her heir, John Estall Hopkins, to take care of her old Negro, build him a house, and take care of him for the rest of his life. And so they built a house for him in the area of where Wells Fargo is on Haddon Avenue. And the only reason that we know his name is because of the Pennsylvania Gazette. A fire broke out in his shed. And, everyone had to come with their buckets and put his fire out. And they reported on it. And he was 90 years old when that happened. His name was Primus Marsh. And I think you have the postcards that I created for Haddonfield Black History. So you probably have one in the library, and there'll be a card in there for him.
Hi. I'm curious about how doing this work impacts you in your interior. How do you feel? What shifts? What struggles? What is it for you to be doing this work?
I was hoping no one was going to ask that question because it is so hard. Every time I think about it, something else comes up. The one thing that came up for me is complicity. We realized that the U.S. economy was built on slavery. And not only was it built on slavery, slavery was codified in our laws. And I think there was some study that there are still laws on the books in some states. And the truth is that without major change, an economy that was created on slavery continues to run on slavery. So how does that look today? I mean, with all this anti-DIY stuff now, I'm trying to separate myself from Amazon. It is painful. And I have been trying to do it for over a year. And I feel like because of I'm the slave now. The corporations have turned me into a slave because I want convenience. I want it tomorrow or today. By the time I get out of bed, I'd like that box at my door. It's very challenging. And Walmart, I don't shop there all the time, but that's another challenge. I do not want to give Amazon or Walmart another one of my dollars. But because, like I said, this economy is run on people being complicit and going against what's right for them just for things that they think that they want and they need. Since this project has started, it has absolutely been crazy. That's why I feel like we're in a portal. Like it's 250 years ago that all of this was happening. I go to NJEA for the teachers convention for the Lawnside Historical Society, and I love the shore. I'm a Jersey girl. I love the shore. I love listening to the waves. I love scrunching my toes in the sand. But this year, since I've been working on this project, hearing those waves crash against those pylons has a whole different sound to me. It actually chilled me, like I actually started crying down the shore because I thought about, we don't know of any slave ships pulling up on to the shores of Jersey, but they pulled up onto the shores of Pennsylvania. And imagine what that sound felt like to the people who were in the bottom of that ship, who had been moving for weeks on end, and now they're stopped. And now they're being pulled out of a ship onto land that they don't know. These are some of the people that we're researching. The people that we are researching can possibly have been the first Africans in America, or the first generation of the children of those Africans. I want to give them voice. What did they think about being here? What was that experience? We try to think that the North was so much better than the South. Yes, colonial enslavement was quite different from antebellum enslavement, but it was loss of freedom nonetheless. I mean, when I come in here, I want to sit up in the balcony. I want to experience what their life was like. That's why I sit in the back. Before I was sitting up front, I'm always a sitting up front person. And I said, when we were sitting in the kitchen in there, first of all, I was not happy to be in wherever we were, because I'm like, I need to be in this room. But in that room, I felt that I should be in the spaces where they were, so that I can understand their lives more. So my life, I feel, has changed in ways that I never expected. And being around this woman over here across the way, she gives me, because I'm a researcher, so I'm like, into the facts and the information, but those records speak to me in a different way than they had before. I mean, I've researched slavery and Reconstruction for years, and I have had to get up out of the National Archives and go outside and just cry sometimes. And I feel that coming up again in these records, because I believe that they want their voices to be heard. And the time is now for that. So thank you I've never shared that with anyone, so thank you for providing this space for me to share that.
Thank you for sharing this painful. Thank you for bringing us up to just a portion of what you must feel and your ancestors felt. I don't like to sit and say, what would be the kind of words that you would like to hear to support you through this journey? What kind of sentences can we use to let you know that we stand next to you, that we hear you? I know it will never be enough. And you can take your time. We're going to have lunch. And you can tell me. I don't mean to put you ladies on the spot. I appreciate that you have exposed yourself. Quakers tend not to acknowledge feelings. They just put them on the side. But I would like to know, how can we support you? What is the kind of sentence that our fellow African Americans here would like to hear from us, so we can be united, supportive, etc.?
She gave us a moment to think about that.
So, in terms of things that could be action items for folks, I just want to draw attention to something that has happened to my neighbor, myself, and is happening across the city of Philadelphia every day. The city doesn't inspect people's homes for renters. They have a set of inspectors that say that they do, but what ends up happening is the inspectors just go to the property and they knock on the door without an appointment, without a call or an email in advance. So you call Philly 311 and you request an inspection because your landlord hasn't been keeping up the property. And if you're a working person, you don't even know that the inspector's been there. They may leave a card in the door, but then if you have neighbors, that card will fall out of the door, people won't notice it. And there are families that have no idea that an inspector has tried to come to the property because of this. Just in December, a 12-year-old girl died from an asthma attack due to black mold in the apartment. And so I've been aware of this issue for about 12 years. I kind of was forced out of an apartment 12 years ago and was going to pursue it, and then kind of swallowed my pride about it and just said, no, you know, I'm working, I've got other priorities, I'm safe now. And it just recently happened to me again, where after 3 years of fighting with the landlord and trying to get the inspection service to step in and do, just to stop the eviction, like to stop an eviction proceeding that was falsely brought against my neighbor, not myself, to try and stop the threats. We called the police a number of times when threats were issued, and completely illegal things like shutting off utilities. The police will do nothing in the city of Philadelphia to stop this against anyone. And reading some of the stories that have been occurring where people have no heat, even though like there are bills passed that say, oh, if you don't have any heat, the city will send an inspector in and we will then send a repairman to repair the heater and we'll put a lien against the property. Well, Illinois' official position is that bill didn't tell us who was going to do it and it didn't provide us any money to do it. So no one's assigned to do that and we're not doing it. And so as much as we hear about the bills in the paper, we need to also be pressing to make sure that action being taken, that people are being kept in their homes, and we're fulfilling on those promises to keep people from getting illegally evicted or just scared out, as happened to my neighbor, and you know, unfortunately to me. So yeah, I just think that it's hard to see that happening and to see how many people are turning their backs on the folks that this happens to. Pew did a study in 2021 where they surveyed people and they found that 20,000 families were facing illegal self-help eviction in the city of Philadelphia every year, to get an idea for the scale of the problem. So if people, I don't mean to speak for y'all, but at least for me, that's something that I've been paying a lot of attention to, putting some effort behind, trying to fix or at least get the courts to address it more directly. Because even when they do end up in court, some of the nonprofits I've spoken to have just said, like the police say, we don't do landlord-tenant. That's their official position. And then some of the nonprofits who wrote a guide about how to do landlord-tenant litigation said, oh yeah, nobody actually brings those cases, and even if you do, you're not going to win. So it's not even worth bothering. And that message has been heard loud and clear because when I tried to bring such a case, people were surprised and wished me good luck. Even just the functionaries that were the ones evaluating my paperwork to apply for that. It was kind of novel that somebody was actually using these mechanisms, which is terrifying when it's 20,000 families a year.
In some research also that I did, I noticed that there was a very close connection between, especially the Philadelphia yearly meeting and the London yearly meeting. And I'm wondering if you've seen any correspondence or done any research with the London yearly meeting related to what was happening here, because as we know, the same issue was going on in the then Commonwealth at the time, and I would think that they would want to know what was going on in the colonies related to this issue.
I'm going to answer your question, but add a whole lot more to it. We have just started. We've been focusing here. But I guess maybe a concluding statement is going back to the manumissions, the majority of them took place during the Revolutionary War. And at that time, there was a public discourse. Some elevated, we should end slavery for the right reason. And according to Dr. Gerald Horn, there were a lot of people, particularly in the South, but people involved in the slave trade, like John Hancock, who was an attorney for people engaging in the slave trade. A lot of people wanted to protect the institution of slavery. And so as friends, I'm proud that while this discourse was going on, our ancestors were talking about the importance of slavery. And just imagine what would have happened if, in the end of the American Revolution, that they would have decided that slavery was wrong and would have not given in to those who wanted to maintain slavery. It would have changed so many people's lives. It would have, we would not have had the Civil War and so on. And so what we're looking at is just a tiny piece of that picture. And I would love to go to London and read some of those materials. But for now, we're really just looking here and trying to understand what was happening at that time. So let me finish by just thanking you all for staying. We have lunch. I want to especially thank Shamele and Jayne. And a few more thank yous. I also want to thank Lois Hinsky. She and I went to the Haddonfield Historical Library in Camden, and she was the one who actually had her fingerprints on the list that we found for Manumissions within the compass of Haddonfield Meeting. And then this is actually a project from our ad hoc committee on slavery and racism. And so I see Bob's left, and Spira wasn't able to be with us today, but this is really under the care of that committee. And if other people would like to join us on that committee, I think this would give you a taste of the kind of work we want to do. So thank you, everybody, and let's go sit down and have lunch together and continue the conversation.
Hey, Linda, what would justice look like for the enslaved people held by Quakers? What do you think that would look like? That's the last question,
yeah.
So I guess we can...
Ava's asked the question that deserves 20 hours. What would justice look like? I think that's actually something that we as a meeting may want to come back together if there's some folks who would like to have that conversation and to decide what does this mean for us. And we had earlier talked about a formal apology to Lawnside. There are, I think many more things that could follow. And so I welcome people's ideas about how we might proceed.